Welcome to SRT 2.0 training for Kellam High School. I'm Andy Filipowicz, one of the assistant principals. I am the supervising administrator for SRTs at Kellam. However, each administrator does oversee their own students during SRT meetings. I attended a training this summer that was very similar to what you'll see here today. The goal of this training is to share with you the division's SRT goal for the year, and that is implementing SRT 2.0 to enhance the effectiveness and consistency of school SRTs to respond to the academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of general ed students in an equitable manner. As you work through this training, consider how we as a school move more towards SRT 2.0. At this time, I want you to think about a student you've had in the past that you wanted to provide support for, and either you were or you weren't able to actually provide that support, but it was a student who was in need of significant support that you may have been able to come up with and seek assistance from other folks, or maybe you thought about trying to get some help from outside and you just weren't able to actually make those connections. So as you're going through this training today, I'll be referring you to think about that student throughout it. So please have that student in mind, that student that is in need of additional assistance that you weren't able to provide on your own in your classroom, and you needed to reach out to somebody else, and either you were or you were not successful in doing so. So go ahead and think about that student and then complete the quick write. It's always important to remember the why for this work. For us in VBCPS, it comes from our current strategic plan with SRT 2.0 supporting goals 1, educational excellence, and 2, student wellness. As you can see on this slide, there are 2 specific strategies from the compass we're working towards by strengthening how we respond to student needs. To begin sharing what SRT is, we also need to briefly discuss integrated systems of support. School leaders have been introduced to the Strategic Action Agenda for 21-22. This is composed of 3 initiatives that will be the focus of the work across the division this year. Number 1, educational equity, 2, integrated systems of support, and 3, future-ready students through high school redesign. Integrated systems of support is the effort to align how we respond to the needs of students. We are integrating the process involved with SRT, special education, Section 504, and PBIS. Why should we move forward now in this journey? And here are 4 reasons. Number 1, as we're all aware, we've experienced the global pandemic where some students are struggling with academics while others may have excelled. So how will we support those in need, and how will we respond? All students may not need supports of Section 504 or special education, but they still may need interventions that are more intense than something that can be done solely in the classroom and more frequent based upon any of their particular skills that need to be improved. Number 2, we have a data platform, and we believe it will assist schools with the organization of this process. And this platform may assist with signaling when a student is in need of additional support or assist with progress monitoring. At first, this platform will be available for administrators initially. In honesty, I haven't seen this platform yet, but I'm hoping that it will be what it is as advertised, or what it's advertised to be, which is a method of tracking students that is easy to input data on the teacher side. So more information to follow once this becomes more widely available. Number 3 is the use of SRT data will be one component in the comprehensive evaluation, specifically in the identification of students with learning disabilities. School psychologists will no longer use the discrepancy model when identifying students with specific learning disabilities. And finally, SRT 2.0 supports the advancement of PBIS. When we explain what SRT 2.0 is, we want people to know that it's an enhancement of what we've been doing with the original SRT. The process involves school teams planning and problem solving to address the needs of students. And it involves collecting data, identifying interventions, both of which are things that have been done for a while in SRTs. For the upcoming school year, the expectation for schools is a higher level of consistency with these steps to include a stronger focus on data decision-making, evidence-based interventions, and tiered systems of support using a data platform. And I think that data platform is really the key to what's coming this year. So we have to make sure we also know what it is not, what SRT 2.0 is not. It's not a step to special education. It's not a step to a Section 504 plan. A large goal of SRT 2.0 is to set up supports for students so that special education and Section 504 are not the only options or the first options that students need to get help. However, SRT is not a barrier to special education or Section 504. If intervention data suggests a possible disability, a referral to SEC, Special Education Committee, or Section 504 team can be considered at any point in the process. When we talk about SRT 2.0, there's 4 components. The first, high-quality evidence-based classroom instruction. We know it's important that all students obviously receive high-quality evidence-based instruction, and this comes in at the Tier 1 level of the SRT. We know that solid teaching practices include the use of data in small group instruction. Students must be taught effectively at the whole group level. The second component of SRT is ongoing student assessment, and it requires a system of assessment and data-driven decision-making. This involves using multiple data points from universal screening, division assessments, classroom strategies to identify students in need of additional support. It also involves using data-driven decision-making and progress monitoring when academic, social, emotional, and behavioral interventions are put in place. In other words, the term balanced assessment from a few years ago reapplies here. The third component, tiered systems of support. A multi-tier approach is used to respond to student needs and efficiently and equitably differentiate support. SRT 2.0 follows the PBIS framework and incorporates increasing intensities of support, offering specific evidence-based interventions matched to student academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs. Finally, parental involvement. We know that parent input remains critical to the success of a student and to the SRT process. School teams must notify parents when their child is struggling and seek their input for how to respond. Parents must be a part of the process in assisting students. There are also some key terms that we want to quickly share because they are important to understand as you're supporting SRT in our building. First is universal screening. This is the process of assessing students in multiple ways and using the data to determine which students are in need of closer academic, social, emotional, and behavioral monitoring or support. Next is decision rules. This is where teachers and school teams which offer teacher and school teams a structure for analyzing and using data. Decision rules are guidelines for analyzing data to assist with consistency of decision making. Third term is intervention, and I think we know that one at this point, but the systematic and explicit instruction provided to accelerate growth in an area of need. Progress monitoring, regular measurement of student performance to determine if they're adequately responding. The last one is tiered systems of support. The tiered systems of support refers to a layering of interventions over time in response to a student's needs. Now that we've provided a review of what SRT 2.0 is, we will now move to discussing what it can look like on a school level and how as a school we can strengthen our practices for responding to students. As we start with what is Tier 1, we know it is for all students. The goal is all students, including special education 504, English language learner groups, and any other groups that we can identify. Its foundation is strong classroom instruction, school-wide SEL practices. It involves the 8 PBIS classroom practices. And finally, Tier 1 involves the universal screening, which is the data analysis we do when students complete common assessments or benchmark assessments. In action, we know Tier 1 involves the teaching and learning framework. The framework shows the cyclical process that occurs to support student learning in the classroom. We also know that PBIS classroom practices are an important part of Tier 1 foundation. While we're just getting started with PBIS here at Kellam High School in terms of implementation and full implementation, there are several division resources involving PBIS that are available for you to view if you so desire. When teachers use these PBIS classroom practices, the SEL skills, teaching and learning framework at the beginning of the year to build the structures and routines of the classroom, the student understands their role, they gain a sense of belonging, and they feel comfortable in their learning. And these are the ways to support Tier 1 instruction. Once the classroom practices are established and the environment's reflective for students, we can then begin to evaluate a student's academic performance against the standards they're learning. For effective Tier 1 instruction to occur, we must establish clear learning targets and success criteria. Teacher clarity leads directly to Teacher clarity leads directly to student understanding. As a team of administrators, teachers, coaches, and instructional leaders, we must remain focused on the powerful impact of Tier 1 instruction. Take a look at this chart. It's organized to describe the implementation and assessment of both academic and behavioral supports, with academic listed above and behavioral listed below. Think about that student that I asked you to write about in the beginning of this training. With the chart from the last slide in mind, and rewind if needed, choose one of these questions and respond to the prompt that's coming. As we move up the triangle that represents tiered systems of support toward discussing Tier 2 and the implications and coaching opportunities on a school level, we want to remember that Tier 2 is what some students receive. This support's for some students and involves supplemental and targeted instruction beyond Tier 1. Interventions are implemented after collaborative discussion and data analysis. These interventions can be done by the classroom teacher during their class time or can be provided by other school staff as appropriate. Some know these are some of the Tier 2 interventions for English, language, arts, and math. Interventions on a Tier 2 level are personalized to specific student needs, and teachers monitor each student's progress using anecdotal and assessment data, as well as a collection of student work. These are some more Tier 2 options available in various buildings across the division, some of which you may recognize that we do here at Kellam, some we do not. As we identify and build these types of supports, it's important to remember that this focused support is beyond Tier 1, and it provides additional instructional time for skill development, including pro-social behavior, social, emotional, or academic skills, increased opportunities for feedback, additional structure, and predictability. When data proves that a student needs additional support beyond Tier 1 instruction, Tier 2 support should be put in place. Spend a moment looking at the Tier 2 chart. As with Tier 1, it's organized to describe the implementation and assessment of both academic and behavioral supports. Moving forward, but rewind as necessary to answer the second reflection question, thinking about that student once again, choose one of these questions and respond. And beginning to move to Tier 3, we know that this is where we meet, review data, identify interventions, and create a plan for individual students. This is our SRT process. We know it's for a few students or even one student. It's intensive and targeted, more individualized and student-specific than Tier 2. We are adding to what we're doing in Tier 1 and 2, not replacing. It requires a meeting that includes an administrator and multidisciplinary team. There's increased parent and student involvement, and we're looking at academic, social, emotional, and behavioral needs. We are taking a whole student approach. When data proves that a student needs additional support beyond Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction, a student can be referred to SRT and Tier 3 supports should be put in place. Take a look at the Tier 3 chart now on the screen. Unlike the previous two charts, this one's organized to combine both academic and behavioral supports, as all student needs are discussed in a coordinated manner once a student is referred to SRT. Again, rewind as needed to answer the next prompt. With the chart in mind, thinking about that student once again, answer one of these questions. So as we begin to finish up, we know that we've spent most of this training taking a deep dive into the SRT process. We've shown how SRT and PBIS align, but we want to begin the discussion of how SRT will support both the SEC and Section 504 process. We want to remind you that responding to students will involve the integration of multiple processes. What we do with SRT will be integrated with PBIS, Special Ed, and 504. All processes will be better aligned to use data for decisions and provide the appropriate support for students. As we get better at this, you shouldn't see the work of each of these as separate and functioning in silos. With SEC and Section 504, we will integrate SRT to help with data decision-making and eligibility processes. In building our practices of data decision-making, intervention, and progress monitoring, we can use what we learn about how a student learns to be better able to make SEC and Section 504 eligibility decisions. We can become better at identifying what is likely the result of a true disability versus a student in need of targeted support. Nevertheless, it's important to emphasize that while teachers and school teams are using data-driven decision-making to identify student needs and required interventions, at any point during the process, a parent, teacher, admin may refer a student to the SCC Section 504 because they suspect a disability. A student does not have to go through every tier sequentially if a disability is suspected. If warranted, a student can be referred at Tier 1, 2, or 3. However, interventions and progress monitoring data the collection of that data will be very important and provide needed data for the SCC and Section 504 teams to consider. Most specifically for students when there is a suspicion of an SLD, specific learning disability, in reading, writing, or math, data from the interventions applied during the SRT process will be used as one of the components of the comprehensive evaluation, and it will also include other sources as well. As a team member of the SCC, the general education teacher will be the individual who's largely responsible for presenting to the SCC team the interventions used to support the student, the duration and frequency of those interventions, and how the student responded to that intervention. Because progress monitoring data is needed as one piece of a comprehensive assessment to determine if a student has a learning disability, when a student has been referred for an assessment, SRT interventions will be provided continue during that 65-day timeline when additional data components are being collected. For eligibility, the SCC will review the results of the comprehensive evaluation. One part will include sharing how the student responded to the interventions or reviewing progress monitoring data. The team will determine whether or not the student made appropriate or expected progress and use this decision to help determine if the student meets the criteria of having a specific learning disability. So now our final reflection and thinking about your student and knowing now what you've learned about the SRT process, what would you challenge yourself to commit to this year? In just a few seconds, you'll complete that, and then there'll be a brief couple of questions to check for understanding. Once you're finished with that brief check, you'll be finished with this training. And thank you so much for your participation today. More info specifically on how to collect data on students, including the promised data collection method, will hopefully be coming this fall. I'm looking forward to seeing what that's all about, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. Stay tuned.